Can a city, touch the sky, or a garden become a wonder of the world? And what happens when human beings are no longer satisfied with conquering the earth, but also want to understand the stars and overcome death? In this final part about Mesopotamia, we're going to travel to Babylon, the eternal city, to the origins of astronomy, and to the first great hero in history, Gilgamesh.
Babylon. Of all the cities I've visited in Mesopotamia, the most famous and strongest is Babylon. This was what the great traveler Herodotus of Halicarnassus said when he arrived in Babylon. Herodotus was a Greek who lived in the 5th century BC and is considered to be the world's first historian. The ancient city of Babylon was home to one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. A series of gardens were built on the walls in such a way that, when seen from a distance, they appeared to be floating in air. This wonder was called the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. The legend goes that these marvelous gardens adorned with exotic plants were built by the great king Nebuchadnezzar II.
Yes, I did it in honor of my wife, who wanted reminders of the floral setting of her childhood.
Nebuchadnezzar II lived around 600 BC and inherited rule over Babylon from his father, who had overthrown the Assyrians and gained Babylon's independence. Nebuchadnezzar II also conquered Judea and Jerusalem, which means that he was portrayed as a very cruel man in the Bible. But it was thanks to the reign of Nebuchadnezzar that Babylon became a beautiful and wondrous city, becoming the pearl of Mesopotamia. In Mesopotamia, the gods were worshipped in temples called ziggurats. There was a huge ziggurat in Babylon, and it is said that it had a 90-meter high tower that seemed to rise up to the heavens.
Do you remember the first time you looked up at the night sky and fell silent? Something similar happened to the Babylonians.
Astronomy. Like virtually all people throughout time, the Babylonians also gazed at the night sky. The Babylonians believed that the earth was a fixed disk and that the sky was like a sphere that circled around it once a day, which is why stars remained in the same place night after night. But then they noticed that there were heavenly bodies that moved in different directions from all the others. The Babylonians considered these bodies to have magical, supernatural powers. The priests dedicated their nights to studying them and gave them names that we know today as Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, and Saturn. Today, we know that these moving heavenly bodies are planets, and that they move independently from stars because they orbit around the sun. The Babylonians believed that these planets were powerful gods, and that these gods controlled the fate of mankind. The priests began to use the movement of these bodies to interpret fortune or misfortune, and in so doing, the Babylonians invented what today we call astrology. Have you ever asked yourself why there are 7 days in the week? Well, it was the Babylonians who organized the week into 7 days and named them after these 5 planets plus the sun and the moon. In many languages today, the days are still related to these heavenly bodies. In English, these are Monday for the moon, Saturday for Saturn, and Sunday, well, for the sun. The Epic of Gilgamesh. The oldest written story that we know of comes from this time period. It is about a legendary hero called Gilgamesh. The son of a goddess and demigod, Gilgamesh was a very brave, handsome king who also thought he was invincible. The gods thought this king was a little vain and decided to teach him a lesson. And so they created Enkidu, a powerful rival. Gilgamesh and Enkidu had an epic battle. But when neither one could win, they decided that becoming friends would be a lot less work than fighting. And this was the beginning of a great friendship. But there was a greater challenge for Gilgamesh. He had a great admirer named Ishtar, the goddess of love, but he chose to ignore her. And the gods didn't like being ignored at all, and so decided to punish him by killing Enkidu. Crazy with grief over the death of his friend, Gilgamesh decided to try to conquer death. His search led him to a dangerous sea where the plant of eternal youth could be found. But a serpent snatched the magical plant away from the king, and so he lost the hope of being immortal forever. So ends the first story, and so ends our story of the first civilization, stretching back 9,000 years in the past to the fertile plains of Mesopotamia and the very beginning of the history of civilization. Let's dig a little deeper with our time compass and find out about pyramids. If you look at the ancient temples of Mesopotamia, you can see that they have a shape that is very familiar to us, a pyramid.
But wasn't it the Egyptians that built the pyramids?
Yes, the most famous pyramids are in Egypt, but many other civilizations built temples of this shape. In fact, many civilizations that had absolutely no contact with each other, in various corners of the world and in different ages, all built temples in the form of pyramids. We've already seen the ziggurats of ancient Mesopotamia. These temples were built about 5,000 years ago. At the same moment that the Great Pyramids were being built in Egypt, Mesopotamians were also building their magnificent ziggurat temples. Some 2,600 years later, on the other side of the globe, a civilization that had never been in contact with Egypt or Mesopotamia was building its own pyramid temples. The Maya civilization. Just like the ziggurats in Mesopotamia, the Mayan temples were used by priests to honor their gods in religious ceremonies. And in Central America, around the year 150 AD, the members of a civilization called Teotihuacan began the construction of an impressive sun pyramid. They did not use stone blocks like the Egyptians, but mounds of earth covered in pieces of petrified lava. 50 years later, the Teotihuacan completed a pyramid measuring almost 64 meters in height and with 365 steps, one for each day of the year. 1,200 years later, the Aztecs continued this tradition in Mesoamerica. In the legendary city of Tenochtitlan, they built 25 temples that imitated the mountains reaching towards the heavens. These pyramids instilled fear and respect, and sometimes ceremonies involving human sacrifices were carried out on stone altars at the peaks of these pyramids.
And remember, everything is amazing when you have the desire to learn.